And especially for creatives, because a lot of times you're only as good as the last thing you've done. Or this voice in your head, the inner critic, tells you otherwise. Or you've got these terroristic thoughts that just crush you. And you didn't allow any of that to happen.
So, Lead from the Outside, available at your local bookstore.
Yeah.
Began as a how-to guide. I was giving talks after I became minority leader, and I started a couple of companies. I was giving these talks, and the two questions I got, one was, how did you do it? And the second was, how can I do it? And so I figured if I'm going to keep saying it, I might as well write it down. But part of writing it down meant that I had to tell my actual own story, and that was not something I was terribly interested in. And so what I wanted to do in this book is not write the traditional leadership book or write the business manual where you just need $10,000 in your uncle's garage and you suddenly become a billionaire. I wanted to write the story of how hard it is if you are from a community that's on the outside. If you're on the outside because of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your physical ability, if you're on the outside because you're poor, or because you don't have somebody who has $10,000. In fact, if you put everybody together, you know they don't have $10,000. How do you succeed? But part of that is beginning with the most important chapter in the book, which is ambition. We are raised to edit our ambition. We are told that if it hasn't already been done, we're probably not the ones who will do it. And we edit our desires based on what we've seen before us. I was never shy, I just didn't like people that much. I was reserved because often the thing I wanted, no one had done, and when you talked about it, people would tell you why it's not possible. Right. They were doing it for your own good. They didn't want you to be disappointed, they didn't want you to be hurt, they didn't want you weren't supposed to reach too high, and that way you couldn't be disappointed. And the problem with that is that if you don't reach, you can never find. And so for me, the first piece is that we have to own our ambition. The fact that we haven't done it just means we haven't thought about it yet. It does not mean it's impossible. And we have to stop editing our desires based on seeing people who've done it before us, that we're just trying to perfect their behavior. But the corollary to ambition is fear. I am afraid of a lot of things, because fear is real. You're often afraid because you're right. There is a monster under the bed. They are going to kill you. It is wrong. Something's going to happen. And my belief is not that you ignore fear. People who tell you they're fearless are either rich. No, that's about it. Everyone else is afraid. And you're afraid for a reason. There are real impediments. There are real obstacles. There really are people who will steal votes and stop you from reaching your potential. The job isn't to ignore fear, it's to acknowledge it, embrace it, make it your best friend, take it out to dinner, get to know it really well. Because once you get to know it, it doesn't cease to exist, but you then start to think about how do you make your way around it? How do you make your way through it, and how do you diminish how much effect it has on you? And the third is failure. I have learned how to fail in multiple arenas. And I have failed privately, I have failed very publicly. I have learned that failure is, people say fail forward. Sometimes you fail backward. Sometimes you were just wrong and it's not going to get any better. But part of success in leadership is learning how to excavate from that failure the next thing you can do. How do you make it better? How do you make it stronger? Or how do you realize that's just not for you and you should move on to something else? And then the last thing that I talk about is hacking opportunity. We're often not going to be given the points of entry that those who come from the majority have. And the majority can be different for each of us, but we may not have that. Our responsibility then is to use guerrilla warfare. I believe in figuring out if I can't get through the front door or the back door,